but the best advice you've never taken?
Probably eat breakfast. I just can't work it into my morning routine yet. And
Yeah.
unless my husband cooks for me, which he usually cooks for me a lot, and it's a gap in my health for sure. I want to be known for being grounded in science and innovative in applying that science to getting real healing to happen for everybody. And that being holistic in its impact. It's not just about patients. It's not just about clinicians. It's about everybody. And putting forward medicines, good medicine into the world that people can adopt and use and apply and get their own miracles, their own stories and their own healings.
Wow.
This podcast is produced by Concierge Medicine Today, LLC. All rights reserved. Concierge Medicine Today, or CMT, was founded in 2007 and serves as the industry's trade publication and annual medical conference organizer. Please note, the information shared on this podcast and across all CMT platforms is intended for general informational purposes only and may contain errors or omissions. Nothing in this podcast nor across CMT platforms constitutes medical, financial, legal, nor professional advice, and CMT is not liable for any inaccuracies. CMT encourages listeners to conduct their own research and consult trusted advisors before taking any action based on the content presented. No mention, interview, or link should be considered an endorsement. This content is primarily intended for a healthcare audience and may not apply to all listeners. Thanks for tuning in.
Well, good morning or good evening, DocPreneur Nation. You're listening to Concierge Medicine Today's DocPreneur Leadership Podcast. And today, I have to be honest, I'm a little intimidated for this interview for our guest. She's a repeat guest, not because she's so smart, but because she studies the exact thing that most of us in life, and who in healthcare in particular, pretend we've already mastered: why we don't do the things we know we should do. Well, we have Dr. Kyra Bobinet with us, and rather than going into where you have been and what you have been doing, I'm going to let you share that to our guests. So, Dr. Bobinet, thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And it's really nice to kind of come back into each other's lives, isn't it? And watching Concierge Medicine Forum grow and your work grow, and you have a podcast. It's so exciting to be here. So basically in a nutshell, I have been on this holy grail pursuit of what is it that causes us to change our behavior as humans long term and stay in that mode versus everything else. Because my history was, both as a clinician, as a public health doc, as a researcher, as a scientist, that most of the things that I've worked on in my career have all been, the 99% relapse category, the works for a while kind of category. And then it's disheartening for myself and everyone else to see ourselves relapse and to see ourselves get stuck after that. And that was such a universal pattern, both in clinical work and research work and population health work, that it drew my attention and it led me to the brain as a very key piece of information and explanation for why we have this gap between I know what to do, I just don't do it, and our patients have the gap. And that's who inspired me to go in this direction, more patients.
Well, and then you have written a couple of books, and we'll talk a little bit more about those. But what has really inspired your shift from, because you work in behavior design too, and from behavior design and neuroscience, like those are not things that we wake up and think, I'm so inspired by these things, like you have to really understand how it can impact people. So what's kind of your journey into those?
Yeah, so the first principles of that journey was I sought to help people, to heal people. And then I noticed that, over and over again, my patients would avoid me if they hadn't done the thing that they promised and swore they would do, or they kind of held their head low and in shame if they were coming back in to clinic and facing the music, if you will. And I didn't want people to feel that way. I didn't want people to feel shame and failure and blame, self-blame and feel bad about themselves. And it just seemed like everything that we were taught to do, which is to either scare you with death or to, put you on some rigid plan that eventually you would fail out of, right? Was causing this harm, I know what to do, but I just don't do it. And the last sort of lesson for me was this woman, Lisa, in my research on, metabolic syndrome and mindfulness and stress reduction. It was in partnership with Duke University School of Medicine, and we published on this eventually. But, she basically in the interim interviews, I was the research director of the study, and she said, I know what to do, I just don't do it. I don't know why I don't do it. And that sort of perplexed, that sort of wondering, I thought that's what I've been wondering too, from the clinician side, from the researcher side. And so we all have this universal problem of knowing what we want to do or what we should do and not doing it. And the more we can have an open conversation about that with our patients, with ourselves as clinicians, as healers, to understand what it is that's happening there. And behavior design to me was one click away from traditional, allopathic medicine, traditional behavior change approaches, which are, performative. They're performance goal oriented, which is what that's called in the literature. It's SMART goals, it's goals and tracking, it's goals and tracking and paying people with incentives. It's everything kind of performative for the clinician, for the outside world, those kinds of things. And it really drives and rides on extrinsic motivation. So that's the norm. That's everything that we know, whether it's a big company like Weight Watchers or Noom, or it's like a little thing like the YMCA in the local town, or like my niece had SMART goals as a 12-year-old gymnast to lose weight for her competitions. And that was encouraged by and structured by the coaches. Or another friend of mine had a first grader that when they started reading, they had SMART goals on who could read the most books and by when and who was on the leaderboard. And we set these things up and we don't realize that it only works for 1 to 5% of the people who are on top, and everybody else, their brain basically shuts down. And so the behavior design was really getting to know behavioral science, behavioral psychology, and understanding that, we are irrational beings. We are driven by heuristics, mental shortcuts, and biases. That's most of our behavior runs on these kind of automatic scripts, these habits, these mental habits, these psychological and emotional habits. And if I'm going to be somebody who impacts another human being's behavior at all, I better be darn clear about that stuff, right? So that was step one. But then a weird thing happened in the first book, Well-Designed Life. I was doing a chapter on motivation, and it turned out that there was this like really esoteric couple of studies that had shown that number one, the number one study showed that if an animal is set up to fail, this area of their brain lit up called the habenula. I was like, what's that? I've never heard of that. I never heard of that in neurology. I never heard of that in neuroscience. And then the second study, it's kind of like chocolate and peanut butter coming together. The second study was if you cause an animal, if you set them up to fail, they would stop trying. They would eventually stop trying. So, and that this part of the brain was responsible. It implied very strongly that this part of the brain was the disappointment center and that it had control over the animal's motivation. So that's all I needed to hear. I was like, whoa, we are onto something here. Flash forward 10 years, since I wrote that book. And the second book, Unstoppable Brain, is all about an anthology of the power of the habenula on our behavior, on our mood, on our decision making, on whether we are addicted to things or not. Like everything that is relevant to docpreneurs, everything that's relevant to concierge medicine practice. Because why would you leave the normal rut of medicine right now? It's because of two things. Number one, you need job satisfaction. And what is draining the job satisfaction for the masses of doctors and clinicians is the lack of autonomy and the lack of time with their patients to do something. So all they do is just order labs and write scripts, order labs and write scripts. They're not engaging the humanity, the humanism of it to assist and be an actual healer. Because any robot could write a prescription and order a lab. And that's becoming more and more prevalent. The sacred ground for a clinician is in the relationship and in the impact on somebody else's health.
Yeah. And it's all about mindset too, because I find that we have so many of those conversations related to, well, I'm curious about these other models. I'm curious if I should just quit altogether. And it's a mindset of, I was taught to be everything for everybody at all times. Oh, and bonus, I get to make no money. And by the way, we're going to ingrain in you that you need to make sure you wear that like it's a badge of honor. And then we expect, a long, healthy career where you're going to be happy doing all of those things.
Mhm.
And you're just not. And physicians take the brunt of it. And, we've talked a lot about patient burnout here and over the years because, there's millions, billions more patients. Everybody ends up being a patient at one point too. And this is happening millions of times. It might be generous, but I'm sure it is. The experience of going to see a doctor. Even we look at the last couple of weeks, where it's, our trust in physicians is waning. I'm sure it was even worse during COVID, but it's gotten a little bit better. But then it's like, okay. So anyway, so we talked a little bit about the moment you realized willpower wasn't the real problem. Explain how the habenula to a room of physicians who spent their careers telling patients, you know what, we just got to try harder. Because that's the thing. You give all these physicians the levers. I was talking with an accountant the other day, and I was like, so you give them these levers, you give them 5 things of levers that they should pull to do something for their business. How many actually do it? And she said, probably 20% will actually pull the levers to make their business more profitable, do more HR stuff, increase operations health, And then what do? They just put their heads down and work harder. And now, granted, empathy says, yeah, you were taught, you're really, really good at that. You just have taught and it's something you're used to. Instead of doing that, I'll make no money. I'll make less money this year, and I'll just work harder because I think that that's the answer. So, what have we gotten wrong related to that?
Yeah, so I think that, if you kind of go from first principles of what makes a solid practice, right? You have patients that feel good about the progress they're making. That's when we have brand loyalty. That's when we have loyalty and respect for the clinician, is when the clinician actually has something to offer us that, TikTok or YouTube or any of these other, more and more technological sources don't. And in fact, there's been a conflation because in medical training, you don't get taught how to change behavior. You really don't, especially with respect to the brain and how the brain works, especially how the habenula works, which is the most important thing to consider nowadays, and then you also have your patients running off, educating themselves with social media. And there's way more flashy marketing people out there and salespeople out there and wellness influencers out there that are just making everything look ideal. And that carves into the discrediting of clinical training, formal training, that kind of thing. And then, of course, the time pressure on clinicians, like you said, work harder and just try to grind, and they're burning flesh, basically, and the time pressure on them, and it disables them from being customized. Our brains are not built to customize a program for each patient that we have. That is a job for large language learning models, I believe. To pull all the evidence together around that particular person, we need technologies that can do that, right? Because that's what they're using chat for. That's what they're using ChatGPT for. And instead, by comparison, the busy clinician ends up having a spiel. In my research with clinicians, every clinician has a spiel, and they kind of slightly tweak it depending on if you recently had a heart attack or you have diabetes or those kinds of things. But it's still a spiel. It's still like a template that they're using to advise each of their patients because they're fast braining. They have to in order to have time. They can't stop. No matter how much time you have in a concierge practice with a patient, you can't spend a whole day just researching, and profiling that person's psychometrics and what they're ready for and all these things. You just don't have. You need tools to kind of shortcut that process. And so the thing I want to get across to all my fellow clinicians is the habenula is the most important thing that you are targeting, whether you know about it or not, in your patient. When you have any influence over your patient's direction and their trajectory, it's because you are unknowingly, unwittingly, intuitively targeting their habenula. Because the habenula in Latin means little rain. So I once went to Fez with my daughter. She had a semester abroad during college, and we went to Morocco. And she was in love with camels. She wanted to ride a camel, which she regrets later because she didn't like how they treated the camels. But they have these nose rings in the camel's nose, and then they have this little leather strap that the handler uses to manage this ginormous animal and get them to do whatever. And they're inured to it. The animal is like very obedient to that little rein. So similarly, that's how you can remember how powerful the habenula is that it is controlling all of our motivation. It is more powerful than the reward pathway. The anti-reward pathway is what it's called in the literature. And when I say the habenula, I'm really, for those who are getting technical with me, I'm really talking about habenula and friends, habenula complex. It's like a bunch of different areas: the prefrontal cortex, the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the amygdala, the hippocampus, the ACC, the dorsal raphe. These other areas that people might be familiar with are all in concert, but let's say that the habenula is kind of the conductor.
Yeah. Who else is talking? Where is this? Because when I read your book and really just geeked out about it, I was like, I've talked with hundreds of doctors over the years, and this has never really come up. And I know that it is so fascinating. You even talk about it in the book, like we've got these false reward centers on our wrists, and our fingers, these, or the whatever they might be, and how did you just discover this? Like, where did I'm fascinated by it because it's like, wow, you just really, was it part of, like, what just drew you to this and was like, okay, I got it, I get it, and this impacts everything. And you've already shared a little bit about that, but so I apologize if I'm asking a repeat question, but we can also go into the no-do gap here in just a moment too.
Yeah, I would say that I just stubbornly asked the question, how do humans change for real, for good?
Yeah.
And that led me to everything. It led me to the habenula. And by the way, I'm not a wet lab habenula researcher. And so I'm somebody who translates all the wet labs into practice. I'm a bridge. And so far as I know, I'm the only bridge right now. Anybody who's talking about the habenula has been either interviewing me or following my work or that kind of thing. I didn't mean to become, the number one translator of habenula science into clinical practice, but that's what's happening. And it's an honor to really help people understand what doesn't work and what works, because that's where I came from. That frustration is what's driven me this whole time, failing over and over again, my patients failing, my clients failing, everybody failing eventually, relapsing eventually. And that hits us as clinicians. We have a habenula too, by the way. And
Yeah.
when we are disappointed, so the habenula is activated by failure, disappointment, frustration, demoralization, um, you know, helplessness, all of those energies, all those negative energies, and it is the locus of negative self-talk.
Mhm.
So when we're talking badly to ourselves or we're flogging ourselves to work harder, not smarter, when we're just grinding and burning flesh and stuff, and we're burning out as clinicians, it's because our habenula is like, this isn't working out for you. And now I'm going to take away your motivation and I'm going to shut it down. And so that you have to work twice as hard to get out of bed. You have to grind twice as hard to get through your day. And you're, afraid of failing, and then that leads to depression. Why are these clinicians committing suicide? It's because their habenula is telling them, red alert, this isn't working out for you, and shutting down their motivation, which leads to depression, anxiety, addiction, those kinds of behaviors to cope with the intense suffering of our negative self-talk being triggered by all of this. And so we don't know we have habenulae, and so we're careless with our habenulae, and we accidentally induce things like depression as a set of symptoms, frankly. Because if you look at the deep brain stimulation studies on habenula, they can do neurosurgery, zap the habenula, turn it off, and the person comes back like robustly and immediately. It's immediate. And so, there are different layers of psychiatric treatment. There's narrative layers like talk therapy. There's chemical like SSRIs or other medicines. One second. Apologies.
No, you're good.
There's hormonal, like hormone replacement therapy and those kinds of things to make sure you're balanced. There's magnetic, like TMS, that are being tried, but they can only penetrate to larger areas of the brain that kind of talk to the habenula, if you will, because the habenula is literally in the center of the brain, and it's only half a centimeter bilaterally. And
Is
then,
it a necessary evil? Because isn't
it's
it a
not evil.
portion of that also kind of protects us too?
Yeah, it is your guardian. It keeps you alive because it keeps you from doing things that are life-threatening or that are foolish, or like doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. It's the gated switch to wisdom, to efficiency, to wise action and wise effort, and those kinds of things. So even though it, in the brute force sense, it's allowed, it kills our motivation if we're on the wrong track or if we're up against something that is triggering us. Ultimately, it is our friend.
So let's move, because now that we've kind of unpacked the foundation of this, for clinicians hearing this for the first time, what is the iterative mindset and how is it different from willpower and compliance model most of us were trained to use with patients?
Yeah. Or I'm going to scare you that, if you don't stop smoking or drinking, you're going to die early. Like that's all I was taught, and it's nobody's at fault here. We literally were not taught properly in our medical training around this particular thing. My husband had a cardiac ablation last week, and the fellow came in who was helping on his case, and she said, yeah, like I asked her, why'd you go into this kind of interventional cardiology? She said, because I didn't want to have to tell people they can't have fun and be the bad guy. So people are choosing specialties just so they don't have to face human behavior change. That's how scary it is and how ill prepared we feel. So nobody should feel ashamed. I want to just, spray anti-shame spray on everyone listening right now, that it is not your fault that you were not trained to do this. And the most incredible thing is that we live at a time when the habenula science is coming out and the iterative mindset has been discovered. So this was something that I accidentally discovered, like most important discoveries in the world. And I was doing research on frontline workers for Walmart around the nation. People have their sandwich generation. They've got, single parents. They're taking care of their elders. They've got two jobs. They're working, minimum wage in many cases. And there was a certain little tiny segment of them who had gotten off their medications, lost weight, exercised, ate healthy in the middle of a food desert, kind of defied all the odds of what we think about in terms of social determinants of health and those kinds of things. I was like, who are these people? These are miracle people. And in studying and interviewing, doing deep interviews with them and coding that research, there was only one thing they shared in common, which was this I called iterative mindset, which is basically instead of setting a goal, a fixed goal, and having a deadline and a SMART goal and that kind of thing, they would set up a experiment or a practice or let's just see if this works, And then, so there was an exploratory kind of aspect of it, as opposed to like, if I don't get 20 pounds done by summer, then I'm, whatever, I'm a failure. And then the second thing they did that was different from everybody else is that instead of failing, they would iterate, which means they would tinker and tweak and futz with and make little modifications and adjustments to whatever it is they were trying. Instead of failing, they would keep going. And the way that you kind of marry that with the neuroscience of the habenula is that these people effectually found a clever way to not trigger their habenula, to protect themselves from the perception of failing or disappointing or frustrating. And they had different, like, amazing, brilliant ways to keep themselves in effort or to shorten their relapse. If they had a relapse, they had a way of like getting back on the horse faster than other people.
Hmm.
So
can,
I
yeah,
codified this and then we studied it, and we can talk about the studies on that. And it turns out that it's the most protective factor of anything in psychology, anything in behavior change that I've seen, any mindset that I've seen. And we have the data that proves that. It's really quite remarkable.
I think of my wife she's very good. She should have been a lawyer because she's so good at it, and I lose every debate, the argument that we have. But she said, oh yeah, you want to lose weight? Just try avoiding bread first. And it didn't trigger that habenula, the negative thought. It was like, okay. And then as I iterated over the couple of years, it was like, oh, I shouldn't probably, if we go out for Mexican, I just won't have the chips that they put in front of you with the salsa, because chips are kind of a form of bread. So it was like, I kind of would, and then it worked. And then I had lost like 20, 25 pounds. And I was like, wow, this is so different. And it's a pattern I had never experienced before. And I see, now that we're kind of self-aware, we've drank the Kool-Aid of understanding, oh, this is why we do what we do. I'm fascinated by this area, and I'm so grateful that there's someone like you and your team that's doing this. How does shifting from a compliance enforcer mindset to an iterative facilitator mindset change the daily experience of practicing medicine and protect clinicians from that moral injury and compassion fatigue?
Mm-hmm. Well, what I'll say is that, because this is the most natural thing in the world, and what the predominance of SMART goals and all that kind of stuff, all that performative stuff is more artificial, less natural for us as animals. This is found in nature, iteration. Animals iterate, and there was a recent study that if you knock out a rat's habenula chemically, that it will literally keep doing plan A over and over and over again and not move to iteration. And so the habenula is the gating switch for us to go from that insanity of doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, to plan B, plan C, plan D, plan E. It's like you liberate the creativity, and anything that a clinician is doing that is working is following this method, whether they know it or not. And so my main message is know what it's made of. Don't accidentally do it on purpose. And, we have had a lot of clinicians, mostly from mental health, but also I haven't talked to the allopaths yet and the naturopaths yet, about, physical medicine, asking to be certified in this. So we're putting a certification together for clinicians, and I'll do my level best to get it into like an online course so that, and right now it's being certified, CME credits, CU credits, that kind of thing. It's not a moneymaker. It's not why I'm in it, but I want to be able to scale people's ability, other clinicians' ability to use the right medicine for behavior change. And for me, everything that I've seen points to iterative mindset as the way. So being an iterative supporter, facilitator, sounds like, well, yeah, Michael, you might want to do the no bread thing. It's really important, though, that we have a backup plan because we don't know right now how that's going to fly with your lifestyle. You might
Mm-hmm.
find that, you can't have friends without bread. We don't know. And
Yeah.
so I would coach you that in a way that would protect you from your habenula so that you, outside of my presence, you would be preventing, I would be preventing you from thinking of yourself as a failure because we made some experiment in the office, right? And we would talk about it that way. And we would talk about like, okay, well, if you're out there in the field and you find that bread isn't the no eating bread isn't working, see what else you can get yourself to do because you are a doer and you are a planner. And the planner is trying to put things in front of the doer that the doer is accepting or rejecting, right? That's all that's
Mm-hmm.
happening. And so come back the next time we'll talk about it, and I'll be interested in learn, what the unlock was for right now.
Yeah.
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 And then as we have a relationship, because I'm a concierge medicine doc, or, I have more time with you than normal, we can build on that story, and I can drip more teachings to you as a patient around managing your brain. Like you didn't know there was this kill switch for your motivation. And that's what we're talking about avoiding right now,
Yeah.
and just being able to soft float depending on the patient's level of sophistication. You can go up or down in reading level in coaching them. And that's my vision for clinicians is to get really, really good at this working with the brain instead of against it.
Wow. The older I get, and I think the more mature we get into our relationships with others and friends and family. Oh my goodness, family. Um, and even in with your spouse, I noticed that I've had to it's like I've default to fixer, or and it's so much of I've created this neural plasticity that's like, I don't want to do that, but why do I do these things? And anyway, I'm dealing with that. That's fun,
I, I,
but
I, I hypothesize that the fixer gene is on the Y chromosome, so it's not your fault.
well, that's good to know. I'll tell
It's a
Kelly that for
pattern.
sure.
It's a
Uh,
pattern in our world.
Well, she did see it a little bit at dinner last night. I was like, "So you see, our son said what to you 5 times, and how, and you get so annoyed when I say it once." She's like, yeah, but he's who he is.
We
Well,
are the least
for
enlightened around our spouses and our loved ones, aren't we?
yes,
Yeah.
um, what's the one thing physicians should stop doing with patients tomorrow or today because it triggers the habenula instead of helping?
Yeah, I mean, my biggest news for the clinician community is stop setting SMART goals
Wow.
because they are inflexible and they set somebody up to fail. It is far more probabilistic that if you and I agree on a SMART goal, that you will not perform that as expected or as you promised. And I'm setting you up, I have this philosophy of like, don't tempt the innocent. I'm setting you up as my patient to have probably 99% chance of failure in some way that your brain is going to be like, well, it wasn't perfect, or it didn't happen on time, or it didn't happen that way that we predicted. And so the more variables, you got 5 variables, SMART, to fail on. If any
Mhm.
one of those fails to make the mark, the brain is going to be like, oh, well, that didn't work. or it's not perfect, or I failed on some level. And then the habenula is like, do tell. And then the habenula is like, well, we're not doing that anymore. Shut that down. And so you come back to me in a shutdown state. So I haven't yet met somebody who can render SMART goals safe for the brain. I think it's possible. I think it has to do with maybe the optionality that you end with. And there's something in the literature, very terrible wording, but it's called mental contrasting implementation intentions, which I would say is a close cousin to iterative mindset, but it's not as real life articulated. It's more, it was born in a lab kind of thing. But it gets at some of this, like, set your intention, right, of what you want to see, and then have the implementation intentions part is what is your plan B? But they only go to plan B. They don't go to C, D, E, F. They don't go all the way through and give the concept of, if this isn't working as planned, then just iterate and see what you can do.
Yeah.
And so that's where I would say that iterative mindset is superior to anything else out there, including growth mindset. Because growth mindset, if you look at the mechanism of action, if I could say it that way, it's not over for you. So your habenula might be like, it's over for me. And it gives you a little spacer and says, no, it's not, Michael. Like, you were born to grow. Oh, okay. It's not over for me. I'm not done growing. And that belief can sometimes, for certain people in certain circumstances, overcome a sense of failure. But it doesn't look failure in the eyes the way that iteration does. And the way that, iterative mindset does, because the first step in iterative mindset is turning off the habenula somehow, some way. And that has to do with, reframing, restoring, like adjusting the perception of the brain and where that is going. So yeah, I mean, I think that, it's difficult because I'm moving people's cheese, but not doing
Great book, by the
goals.
way.
Yes, it is. Great title of a great book. But it's basically, if you can stop doing SMART goals, and people do them because they think that's the right thing to do and they think that it works. But there's literally studies, like a 12-month study, that showed that there's 3 groups. One got weekly emails, health education emails around their New Year's resolution. That was their goal. The second group got a SMART goal applied and a personal coach to walk you through it, plus the emails. And the third group got nothing. And guess what? The SMART goal group came in below doing nothing.
Wow.
Outcomes. It got worse outcomes than doing nothing. And that's what I mean. Like, we all made a pledge, do no harm, right? But we are accidentally doing harm. So I would just say, like, don't do harm by not doing SMART goals. Instead, talk about, like, well, what do you want to try? What do you want to experiment with? Let's see. Let's just see. Let's figure it, and you can figure it out, And I would say that with your kids too. The most important thing for a kid is to hear from their parent, you'll figure this out, because it's empowering. I'm not abandoning you. I'm not throwing you in the deep end and saying, whatever, but I believe in your ability to iterate.
Yeah. Gosh, that is a parenting golden nugget right there. Like, you should start going on tour for parenting conferences, because that is something I can see in my 3 kids of, and you try, right, as a parent, and you do your best, and, you hope that they come home to visit you, and you can develop that over time, and that they want to come home to visit you versus like, no, I don't want to go back, but that I believe in you, that iterative, like, you can do this. It just might be different, different than the way you're approaching it right now, but I know you can do this. And that is, to put some science behind it, and to put some brain science and chemistry and research behind it, is just so encouraging that, yes, there are reasons we do this, and, and it is fascinating. So Couple of we're going to move into our lightning round of questions. So we could talk for hours here. But these are questions you can be however brief or however long-winded as you would like. But you mentioned SMART goals. Most leaders, that includes positions too, run on SMART goals. But you've said metrics can become sharp objects that make people quit. How should a physician, a docpreneur, somebody listening to this in the practice, lead their team using iteration instead?
Yeah, and I would say that, most people who come across my work freak out at first. What are you talking about? I can't do performance goals for my people or myself or no, that's not what I'm saying. Performance-based goals are useful if you are expert in something, if it's like a short-term use, you know, and also if it's irreversible. So, somebody could set a SMART goal or whatever of finishing high school. Once you have the high school diploma, nobody can take it away from you, right? That's not true for weight loss. Once you lose weight, it's not irreversible, right? And so you can regain the weight. So that's not a good use case for performance goals. At work, in a practice, I would say that having performance goals sets up people to lie, cheat, and, feel bad, be anxious. Because again, like the SMART goal example we talked about earlier, you and I are agreeing upon something that's almost like clairvoyance, 12 months later, we're going to be here. And I think a more honest way to set up that agreement is we're going to shoot for this. And if we get these things out of it, we're going to have rewards, party, whatever, spot bonuses. But we recognize that we don't know what we're going to encounter on our way to that. And we also don't know if we need to readjust our target, as we go. And so in my company, the dance is always like, where are we acknowledging nature that we can't be perfectly prescient about everything? And where are we being unaccountable? Because really what people are doing when they try to do performance goals is they try to institute accountability so that there's clarity and there's impetus to work together and to accomplish something together. That's really all they want. And so I would say that our experience in my company is that when we have this iterative layer to our performance reviews, like, how are you iterating? What did you do? It doesn't matter whether you hit an obstacle or something wasn't true that you thought was true. What matters is how did you respond? Because that's what you can control. And that keeps people in an empowered state and honored for their creativity and their adaptability.
I think we need to put a new word. It needs to be more front and center in healthcare: iteration or iterate. Iteration. Say that 5 times fast. Nonetheless, so without giving anything away about your time coming up here in October here in Atlanta at the Concierge Medicine Forum, I want you to tell us about Fresh Try or Fresh Try Pro and what you guys are doing there, what you're doing at your company every single day, and what you go into the office where you log on and you're like, I'm so excited about the work that we're doing. So tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing.
Yeah, so Fresh Try Pro is a clinician grade behavior change platform that runs on iterative mindset method. And that is mindful of the habenula science that we've been talking about. It's the only thing of its kind. It was built over the last 9 years in partnership with Walmart, but Walmart took no stake in the company, meaning that we are 100% employee owned and we are women owned. And, we are in a position, therefore, of privilege. We're in a position of privilege to have this, what is now like a $30 million piece of software, to be able to deploy it for the benefit of clinicians and their patients. And I had this epiphany, because, we only get one grand life that we know of, right? And we can place our life anywhere on the board. and position ourselves to be helpful or extractive or narcissistic or, community minded. And I had this epiphany that what I care about is clinicians. I care about relationships happening in healthcare because as things, and I live in Silicon Valley, so as things get more and more automated and robotized and, um, skeuomorphed, which is like you take something human and real and natural and you turn it into something of an abstract icon, or an abstract experience, that is supposed to mimic, that is like virtual reality to what reality is. And I decided that I want to place my energy on the clinician-patient relationship and on patient long-term behavior change so that they don't become more and more reliant on just pharmaceuticals. Because no matter how great these pharmaceuticals are, the long-term impacts of them can be harmful, can be weakening, can, create uncertainty in our biology and can create dependency in our biology. And so, nobody ever wants to be on these things. They just kind of do a cost benefit analysis on, and that's why most elder people in our society are on polypharmacy because of this. So I want to offer whatever I have discovered to the field and really help people to do it the right way and to do it the more natural way and sustainable way.
We say a lot around here. It's no longer about being the best doctor in the world anymore. It's about being the best doctor for the world, for your patients, and for your local community. And that was actually based on a book and some strategy that I got some help with years ago. And it's given me another language with physicians because it is just said, look, we are for you and we want the best for you. And, concierge medicine, for example, might be one of those choices for you. It's not the only option out there, but it definitely is setting the bar high for how others could run their practice, should see their patients. The best advice you've never taken, except for a story you mentioned in the book, which was bidding on a raffle, which I thought was a really entertaining story that took you on a trip with you and your husband, but the best advice you've never taken.
Probably eat breakfast.
Mm,
I just can't work it into my morning routine yet. And
yeah,
unless my husband cooks for me, which he usually cooks for me a lot, and it's a gap in my health for sure.
yeah,
I think
me
my life
too.
would be so much more powered if I were to get that down.
Well, this is a tip of the hat moment. This is our second to last question. Who's a mentor or collaborator or someone that is influential in your world that just deserves it? It's not an advertisement, or it can be, but it's just like, you know what? That person or that organization, they're just doing it right. Who do you want to give your flowers to?
Well, my team, first of all, because they are willing to go into the brush, into the unknown, into the, salmon run with me, going upstream against, everything else that is consolidating around healthcare costs and, disempowering the patient, disempowering doctors and clinicians. And so, they're brave for doing that. And so kudos to them for having integrity and having passion and having care for those things. And again, the clinicians are my heart, because of all the people incentivized to do things, they are the ones who have taken on the mantle of I will help serve my fellow humans. And that is always going to be heroic in my mind. And I want to empower and enable them and to create ease for them as much as possible and to create, better outcomes for patients. And so, and I also believe strongly that healers by archetype are supposed to be independent. They're supposed to be able to practice the art of healing. And when they are subjected to large corporations and being cogs and being, basically preyed upon by people who don't have all of the patient burden and care for others and can spend all their time talking about how to basically make the doctors or make the clinicians do what they want, right?
Yeah.
The business runners, then they become disempowered. And that's why we see burnout. They become complacent and they kind of lose their way. And they tell themselves stories of like, well, I'm just doing this. But I'm old enough, I'm 56 years old, I'm old enough to remember a different conversation when I was in medical school, which is you will come out of here and you will open your own practice and you will run your own life. And so entrepreneurism and doctoring were one and the same. And I would like to uplift and uphold and make possible and feasible that path for more and more doctors to achieve freedom.
Wow. I love that. And thank you for sharing that. And thank you for the spirit in which you're doing that, because that's something we're passionate about here when we say it for doctors, I love that. And I think it was a story that I remember. She's a concierge doctor in Connecticut. And over COVID, we didn't really know what to do or how to do it. So we sent, individually wrapped eye masks to all these different doctors with thank you notes. Just thank you for what you're doing. And, but I remember we got an email months later. It was like, I use that thing every day to take, to sleep in my office on our couch, and it's just like, you have no idea.
That's
So,
awesome.
it's really neat to see, that you have a passion for doctors as well. And that I think that the ocean is blue for you and what your team is doing, because this is so important. And, I really admire what you and your team are doing, because it's so unique and it's frontier, but not too frontier, right?
Mhm.
So our final
Practical.
question for you, and we'll put all the links in the show notes of how to get in touch with Kyra and all of her team and to learn more about Fresh Try Pro. We ask this of all of our guests. At the end of the day, you hung up your spurs. What do you want to be known for?
Hung up my chaps. I want to be known
Sorry,
for.
yes, I completely agree.
That's
I'm
okay.
there with
That's
you.
all right. That's all right. For those of you who don't know, I have practiced a certain kind of horsemanship that doesn't use spurs. So that's what the inside joke is between Michael and I. I want to be known for being grounded in science and innovative in applying that science to getting real healing to happen for everybody. And that being holistic in its impact. It's not just about patients. It's not just about clinicians. It's about everybody. And putting forward good medicine into the world that people can adopt and use and apply and get their own miracles, their own stories and their own healings.
Wow. The idea of do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. I love that. Well, thank you, Dr. Bobinet, for being our guest, and we'll see you here in a few weeks in Atlanta, and I'll let you get on with your busy day and say hello to your team for us. We appreciate all that they do and all that you do, and I love the topic. So we'll catch you on the next one.
All right. Thanks for having me.
All right, friends, that's a wrap on today's conversation. But here's the thing, every physician listening to this show is standing at the same crossroads. You can keep doing medicine the way it's always been done, or you can build something that actually works, for you, for your patients, and for the community you serve. That's what this show is for. Not hype, not theory. Real stories from real doctors, patients, and concierge medicine industry leaders and pioneers who decided to lead healthcare into the remarkable, instead of just surviving it. So here's our ask, and it really does take 2 seconds. If this episode gave you something worth thinking about, do us a favor and share the show with the people that you know. A colleague, a doctor in your call group, someone standing right where you used to be. You never know, this might be the conversation that changes the whole trajectory of their career. And if you've got 2 more seconds, leave us a review. It genuinely helps other physicians find this show, and honestly, we read every single one. Last thing, don't miss what's coming next. new books, upcoming events, and a front row seat to the Concierge Medicine Forum, all waiting for you at www.conciergemedicinetoday.com. Thank you for choosing to be the best doctor and medical practice leader for the world. We'll see you next week. This has been Concierge Medicine Today's DocPreneur Leadership Podcast.